Hey guys, my name is Calgary and I head up the production team here at Zion City Church. I want to thank you guys for continuing to watch our videos online, and if you still want to invite a friend to church, you can do so by sending this video to a friend or loved one. If you'd like to partner with our church, you can do so at zioncitychurch.net/give. We're in a brand new series called the Pillar Series, and who better yet to kick it off than our Pastor Andrew Rayella.
All right, today I got the privilege of sharing our pillar today, which is community. And this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. It's something that I really enjoy. We're a family. None of us follow Jesus alone. We follow him together. That's what it states on our website. And that's really what this whole idea of community is sharing together this walk in the Christian life. In the book of Hebrews, it says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And then in Proverbs, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. So we're better together. So life as a Christian is done much better, not as a solo act, but as a group act on the thing. We're not meant to take this walk alone. So really one of the best ways that we can form relationships is to spend time outside of this gathering here with one another, right? So Pastor Andrew said on many occasions that church happens best around a table sharing a meal. And that's one of the best ways that we've found as a family to get to know you guys and really plug into your guys' lives as well, is just to have you guys over for lunch or dinner or something like that. So we've had several of you guys over already, and we'd love to have all of you guys at some point to get to know you, to really create this whole sense of family. Because, you can walk in here and be absolutely, come in, listen to the message, listen to the TED Talk, right? And so we can do that, and we can walk away and not be changed. And, we may take that to heart. We may not take that to heart. But you know what? If we're spurring one another on together, it's just an amazing experience. So we've shared the meals. We've also found some common interests with some folks. So we've gone climbing with Jordan and Aaliyah. So there's nothing more bonding than having somebody's life at the end of the rope. And you're responsible for that. So, you share challenges and trials together and things like that. We've gone, just gathered together at an impromptu after church. We went shooting with a bunch of the guys from church, and even Aaliyah joined us on that as well. So if you like blowing things up and shooting stuff, well, there's people that'll do that. I know that Joe loves fishing, right? So at some point I want to go fishing with Joe. I don't see Joe. Where'd he go? He's out in the parking lot maybe. But anyway, he could probably take you fishing and teach you how to do some stuff. Or if you just like hanging out and, getting a line wet, that's something that you can do. Ladies, if you like tea, my wife loves tea. She's got this whole gathering of teas that she can do. In fact, this Friday night coming up at what time? 5:30, is it? Yeah, we're having a gathering for the ladies at our house. Okay, so men, you're not invited. But that's a wonderful opportunity to get to know some of the ladies in the church, just outside of church and share a meal together. It's going to be an awesome time. It's going to run from about 5:30 to when? Whenever. All right, so I'll make sure that I'm not there. I'll find something else to do, but that's another great opportunity to do that. So just take those opportunities. I challenge you guys to go out and, find somebody and go to lunch with them, all right? Maybe you're not a good cook. That's great. We got a great taco truck right out there. Grab some tacos, take them back to your house, and hang out with them, right? I've had some of the guys from the worship team over, and I'm a horrible guitarist, but we sat there and we jammed together, right? And we had some fun, and we really shared some memories, and I'll tell you what, that type of thing is awesome. And don't forget, coming up this month, not this month, I guess it's next month, tomorrow, right? We've got community groups starting. So that's a wonderful, wonderful way for you guys to plug in. So we've only been here for 4 months, but I really feel like you guys are family. And I want to get to know a lot of you guys much, much better. Just really appreciate you guys, and you guys are such a blessing to me, all right, and my family. Thank you.
All righty. So let's talk community. I had a really fun experience over the last couple of weeks. I was at a dinner with my father, and I found yearbooks from when he was in high school. And so my dad's sweating bullets. No, I'm just kidding. Nothing embarrassing. But when I was going through the yearbooks, what was so strange to me was going back and looking at the fashion. How fashion has kind of like repeated itself over time, and just, there was mullets, and different girls had the real big hair, a lot of hairspray. It was the early 90s, And so just going back through the yearbooks, I went and found my mom when she was in school and all this other stuff, and it was just kind of this blast from the past, but this reminder of just that space and time. And I remember being in high school, early on in high school, it was like cargo shorts, bro tanks, the snapbacks. That was like what was happening. In middle school, it was puka shell necklaces, and, don't ask me why. That was just what was happening, And then in elementary school, the really cool thing was to have the backpack, but to have the backpack all the way undone. So, like, the backpack was, like, hanging down low. Again, I don't know why this is the case. But it was so that when you would walk and you had a bunch of books in your bag, you'd be like kind of like flapping your backpack back, and it would like hit the back of your legs, right? And we looked ridiculous. And the parents insisted with us, pull your backpack up, but it wasn't cool, it wasn't trendy, it wasn't a part of the thing. And it reminded me that each of us, within all of us, have this desire to belong. And you're reminded of that when you go back and look at photos and you think, who let me do that, right? Who let me wear that? Why didn't anyone say something? Which they did. You ignored them. But why did I do all of those different things? I mean, for some of you, you had like an emo goth punk phase where everything was black, and, it was just like, and then you look back at those photos and you're like, why do I look so sad, But we all have this desire to belong and this desire to want to change and adapt and to be a part of something. And that's a uniquely human thing, that we have this desire to belong. And I believe that desire is a God-given desire, this desire to belong, because we were not meant to live life alone. We are communal creatures. We were meant to do life together. And this is especially true in the church. However, we find ourselves in a unique cultural moment where we are the most connected generation of people, the most surrounded generation of people to ever be in existence, and yet the overwhelming majority of us do not feel known. One thing we've learned from this last year, and what's really brought into reality, is that digital connection is not the substitute for physical presence, right? Digital connection is not the same as physical presence. Many had to endure things like graduations, funerals, weddings, baby showers, and birthdays through a screen. And though it is absolutely better than nothing, it is not the same. These digital interactions I like to compare to turkey bacon, right? It gets the job done, but it's not the same thing, And don't pretend that it's the same thing. Call it what it is, And I'm not a hater of turkey bacon. We eat it in my household. But if you tell me that that's bacon, you're lying. It's its own separate thing, right? And I found that that's the same interaction with these digital connections, is that it's good and it's meaningful and it's helpful, and especially in a pinch, it really comes through. But it is not a substitute for the real thing. One thing that we find as we dive deeper into the technological world is that the further we go in, the more isolated and lonely we feel. This is a product of the cultural moment that we are in. One of my favorite pastors, John Tyson, in a book he wrote called Sacred Roots, talking about the meaning of the church here and now, he says this kind of individualism can be succinctly defined as the sovereignty of self. Self over others, self over community, self over inconvenience, and self over commitment. Our life and longings are formed around a vision of personal fulfillment at all cost. Everyone and everything exists for us. We want our lives to be an epic story in which we play the starring role. Yet, When we consciously or subconsciously believe this, Jesus' words and Jesus' invitation can become tools we use to meet our own needs. What John Tyson is pointing out here, and I think is really prevalent in our culture, is especially us in the West have become radically individualized. We think the world revolves around us. And studies that they've done from back in the 70s till now, there's been this astronomical growth and people thinking, right, that the world revolves around them. And what technology does is it reiterates those things. One, the algorithm traps us in echo chambers where we only hear the things that we agree with or that we like, and the more things that we like and the more things that we interact with, the more that we constantly get exposed to it. So more and more and more, what we're being exposed into is more and more of ourselves. And so we kind of get caught in this feedback loop of hearing the things we want to hear, liking the things that we want to like, and staying caught up in that world so that everything revolves around the individual. What happens is when we become consumed by our own experience, we erode the relationships in our lives until we have retreated fully into isolation. The mantra of our culture encourages every single person to rely on oneself, right? That is the summation of the teaching of our culture, that the answer to all of life's questions is found within. But what happens? What happens when what is found within is not good or even desirable? In our cultural moment, we live in the illusion of autonomy. We think that we have full control over this whole thing. It isn't until these monumental moments come crashing, and we realize we're actually not in control. We actually don't have full bearings on this thing. That each of us is subject to the control and influence of places and people and narratives all around us. And so if we continue to look within to find the answers, we find ourselves frustrated. With mantras like, be true to yourself, or live your truth shaping us, then by every marker, if those things bring freedom, if those things bring joy, then by every marker right now, we must be our most authentic selves, and we should be producing in us peace and meaningful relationships and happiness. But is that the case? As we've gone further into this experiment of radical individualism, are we happier than we've ever been before? Are we more unified than before? Do we have more peace than before? The studies say the exact opposite. What we are experiencing now is what most sociologists call an epidemic of loneliness. In January of this year, a study was published that surveyed 100,000 Americans, and 61% of them reported feeling lonely. With all those preliminary numbers showing, coming out of last year, that number was astronomically higher because of the pandemic. That when all of these little touch-to-touch relations that were happening at work or at the coffee shop or there are suddenly gone, there's this realization that there's no deep, meaningful relationships or connections that they have in their lives. Studies are showing that the generation coming up, Generation Z, is the loneliest generation in history. That they have, they wrestle with having relationships in real life and instead prefer digital connection. Other studies show that half of Americans report having meaningful personal relationships with someone on a daily basis, meaning that the other half of Americans don't have somebody they have a meaningful relationship with. That they have nobody that they talk to about their life, their struggles, their family, their hurts, their pain. With all of this exposure and interaction and digital connection, we are still longing to know others and for us to be known. What we are longing for is what the biblical authors call the fellowship, koinonia, community. What we are longing for is to be a part of a people. When the screen is turned off and the noise is silenced, we find ourselves longing to belong to a community that is deeper than pleasantries and casual conversations, to belong to a community where we don't have to pretend or act as though we have it all together. We find ourselves exhausted and constantly trying to maintain this Instagram filter in our lives in front of others and crave genuine, meaningful relationships. To put it frankly, we are growing weary of constantly having to wear a mask. That everywhere we go, we curate our lives to form the environment that we are in, to be liked, to be accepted, but we are never actually known. We say the right things, we do the right things, we dress the right way, but we don't have meaningful relationships. There's this scene in a very famous show, Parks and Recreation, where Leslie Knope is interested in this guy, and they start dating, but as she's dating, on paper, he's successful, he's smart, he's funny, all the things add up, but she just can't seem to really fall in love with this guy, really have a meaningful relationship with him. And when confronting her friend, the wise Ron Swanson, he says this. He says, he's a tourist. He vacations in people's lives, takes pictures, puts them in a scrapbook, and moves on. All he's interested in are stories. Basically, Leslie, he's selfish, and you're not. That's why you don't like him. And I think there's no other way to describe, what we're experiencing in the church than that of tourism of people's lives. We come in, we get the photos, we have the moments, we make the memories, but we're not having any sort of meaningful life connections. And that at its root is selfishness. We see this rampant in the church. Many of our communities are founded on this idea of shallowness. We form our communities around convenience and around preferences. We are deeply afraid of being invested into something that might not pan out, so we keep things light everywhere. In an effort to not get hurt, to not get let down, to not get our feelings wounded, we keep everything light and on the surface. But what that does is that never actually enters us into any sort of meaningful relationship. It just keeps everybody at arm's distance. The reality is most of the people in this room have been wounded by relationships and that have fallen apart because of lack of commitment. You opened your heart, you bore things out, and the other person wasn't there for you, or didn't respond, or didn't text back, or didn't show up for the meeting, or whatever it was. And you felt yourself wounded, so you said, that will never happen again. So we close ourselves off from this possibility of relationship and keep everybody at arm's distance, all in an effort to not get hurt. But what we don't realize is we're trapping ourselves within our own loneliness. And we're rotting from the inside out. As a generation, we are perpetually missing out on we're perpetually afraid of missing out on a better opportunity, so we never commit to anything, missing every opportunity. Everyone gets to know the social media version of ourselves, but nobody gets to actually know who we are. So not only do we curate our lives around convenience, keeping everybody at an arm's distance, but it's also preference, right? We'd like to form communities around the people who are most like us. Tyson says this: deep down, most of us living in postmodern America have a fear of commitment. This is not because we do not want to limit our preferences, but because we are afraid that that person, people, and even God we commit to will abandon us and let us down. We're afraid. And we also are incredibly selfish. We curate people around our lives that think like us, that feel like us, that talk like us, that are like us. That's fundamentally selfishness lived out, right? Who have the same ideologies that we have, who dress similarly, who like the same shows, who like the same music. This is how we curate our friends' life. This is how we surround ourselves with people who are just like us. Essentially, we are so embedded in our own selfishness that we surround ourselves with more of ourselves. And when people come into your circle who don't think like you, who don't feel like you, who don't act like you, who don't dress like you, immediately you become standoffish or scared or break relationship because you don't want any part of that. This is not what it means to be a community defined by the scriptures. But this begs the question, then what on earth does it mean to be a community? The first thing I'd like us to talk about this morning is that community first means family. Community first means family. God in himself is a family. You have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit, 3 in 1. God is a family, creating a family. He in of himself is a family. And Jesus had this radical idea that all of his disciples, all of his followers were a part of his family. I want to jump to this scene in Matthew 12. It says this: while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and his brothers stood outside, wanting to speak with him. Someone told him, "Your mother and your brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you." He replied to them, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother, here are my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." So I want you to put yourself into the scene. Jesus is here teaching in a context like that, and there's a knock at the door, right? And someone in the back is like, "Hey, Jesus, your mom's here." And he's like, "Who is my mom?" He's like, "She's at the door, she's here." And he's like, "No, here is my family. Here is this new nuclear family that I am creating. His disciples, these ones who he would follow." And this is a thread that we find all throughout the New Testament. The language of family, brothers and sisters, is used 314 times in the New Testament alone. It is an emphasis over and over and over again that we are family. You all have family. They're a family that you get along with, right? There's that cousin who at a family gathering or a relative that you guys just migrate together, right? Like no matter what the circumstances, you find each other and you migrate together because this is the pack, right? And then you have the strange family members, the ones that if you're going to invite a friend over, the whole call right there, you're explaining the family member. Look, don't look him in the eye. Whatever you do, do not mention the 1976 Super Bowl. It will go bad, right? You're doing all of these things, right, to kind of do that. Whatever you do, stand 3 feet to the left, whatever it is, right, to explain away this family member, to prepare somebody to come and to enter into your family world. They're family members that you love but adamantly disagree with on probably a lot of different topics. This was felt over Thanksgiving or Christmas as a passing comment was made by in the heat of the politics moment, right? That there's this tension and you can feel it in the room. But you are family, right? What happens within that room may be claws and scratching and yelling and saying words you shouldn't be saying, etc. But outside of that room, you're family. That if someone were to say an ill word or bad or make a threat towards them, it's like, hey, they're broken, they're wrong, and I don't like them. But you don't talk about them that way, right? That's my family. There's a commitment to one another. Good, bad, and ugly. There's this deep commitment to family. And to be a follower of Jesus means that you have been born into a new family. You've been born into God's family. We are brothers and sisters. And we have family members, right, who go on live television and speak on our behalf. And we think, I don't want to be related to them, but I am, Frustrated at maybe some of the people who represent us. But this family is broad and diverse. It extends far outside of this room and reaches countries all around the world. We have brothers and sisters in Africa and Asia and New Zealand and Iceland, all over the world. And this is the family that we belong to. And this family is the heartbeat of the Scriptures. All the way through the Scriptures, you find that we are a family, that God has been trying to set for himself a family. It starts with the family of Abraham. And with that whole intention was for Abraham's family to be a blessing to the world. See Genesis 12. And all throughout, God is calling himself a family. Even so much so in John 10, when Jesus is talking about his sheep, he says there's even more sheep are going to be brought into this fold. I'm expanding my family. A great struggle in the early church was between Jews and Gentiles. See the book of Ephesians, see the book of Galatians, right? That there was this tension between them because they did not agree. There was all this hostility. And the scripture authors come and say, you are a family. It's this unifying, bonding thing that brings us all together. But what happens is we do not treat this gathering like a family. We treat this gathering like a business. I know it's been a while since you've been to a restaurant, I'm sure. Or if you have, it's been outdoor seating, and that's not been fun for anybody, right? But you remember what it's like to go into a restaurant and to dine. If somebody got your order wrong, sorry, I hate to complain, but this is undercooked or whatever it is, right? You have these expectations. The waiter hasn't come and seen you within the first 5 minutes to offer you water, to bring the bread. You start doing the look around like, wow, it's not that busy in here, right? We have this assumption of service, It's way too cold in here. Who's controlling the thermostat or whatever it is, right? And there's all these things. The fork is slightly dirty or the cup, whatever, right? We have all these expectations, and we treat the church that way. We come in as consumers. We don't walk into this gathering as a family. We walk into this almost as if it's a business. Wow, he's going a little long today. It's really cold in here. I just didn't care for the worship song choice, not my favorite songs. And I really prefer if they had an electric guitar instead of we bring in these preferences and we think this is how the church is supposed to be. Oh, the programs aren't that great, and I don't like the selection of coffee that they have, or whatever it is. And we don't treat this like a family gathering. I want you to imagine that you go to your next family gathering and you treat it like a restaurant. You go and you sit down, someone going to bring some water and some bread? You know what they're going to tell you, your family? Get up, get your own water, get your own bread, right? Because it's family. Oh, it's a little bit cold in here. Is it? Put on a jacket, right? Get a blanket. I pay for the thermostat. You're not touching it. You know what I mean? That's what family is like. If you walk into your family gathering waiting to be served on hand and foot, no one's going to serve you. Nothing's going to happen. And we treat the church in this same manner. We think that this whole gathering is all about me. I just didn't really get anything from the service today. I just didn't get anything today, It happens, not everyone can be perfect. I just didn't get anything. It just wasn't for me today. That's a total wrong heart when it comes to church. This gathering is first and foremost a family. You're not here for you. You're here for all of us. And we're here for all of us. The whole purpose of this gathering is to bless, to encourage, to edify, to build up, to be sent back out. Not to come and to consume. Not to come and to critique, but to come to give. This is a family. And this is the thrust of the scriptures. I want to read for us, I think, one of the more commonly used passages, but I think an important passage in what the early church looked like and what community looked like for the other church. It is our teaching text, Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 42. It says this: They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. When we read this passage, what's kind of frustrating is it sounds nothing like our experience on Sundays. John Tyson is one of my faves. You're going to get that being here for any amount of time. He redefined this verse as what it would be to be in the church in America today. He says this: They studied the apostles' teaching when they had time. They went to fellowship whenever they could fit it in. They prayed when they needed something and got coffee together every now and then. They were content and had low expectation for signs and wonders in their midst. They sometimes talked about generosity, but kept all their possessions for themselves. 2 out of 5 Sundays, they came to corporate gatherings, and they didn't invite people into their homes and rarely revealed their hearts. They were largely irrelevant to all the people, and occasionally someone was randomly saved. The sad thing is this is our experience, if we're honest. And this is not what the scriptures teach. The first thing that is pointed out is it is a call to devotion. A call to devotion. The first part of the scripture says, they devoted themselves. Now, this idea of devotion, in Christian language, we think of our alone time with God in the mornings. And I understand that, yes, but that's not what the word devotion means. Devotion has this idea of commitment and passion. So it's a commitment first. It is, with all of my heart, I'm going to devote myself. It has this full assurance of commitment that I am all in. If you devote yourself to the gym, that doesn't mean you go to the gym every now and then. If you devote yourself to the gym, you're there all the time, right? If you devote yourself to becoming a skilled fisherman, you're out fishing all the time. Devotion requires commitment. And if I could be completely candid, this is an area I see even our church struggle badly, is in the area of commitment, of being present, of committing to something. If at any moment church, being a part of this community, becomes an inconvenience, our commitment goes out the door. We're not committed to being a part of this community. We are just a part of this community whenever it fits into our already pre-made schedules. And if something impedes or contradicts, immediately this is one of the first things that is let go. Brothers and sisters, the only way we become a community is if we are committed. I want you to imagine that you were in a relationship with somebody who made it very clear that you were committed to them, but they were not committed to you. How long would you stay in that? Not very long, I'd hope, right? I'd hope that would be the case. If this is you and you're hearing this, get out of the relationship now, right? But if you were like, baby, I love you, I want to spend the rest of our lives together, you know what? And they're like, yeah, just to let you know I'm seeing 7 other people, but yeah, I feel that I love you too. You would be out faster than you could blink an eye. Are you kidding me? And I want you to think about a friendship. You're always there. You always take the call, whether it's a flat tire, a new breakup, whatever it is, you're there, you're available, whatever. But when you call, you get the voicemail. But when you text, you get ghosted, right? But when you invite them to something, they never show up. How long would that friendship last? Not long at all. We desire a church to be faithful, to be present, to be invested in our lives, but we are unwilling to commit to that church. We want them to be available for us for every low, for every heartbreak, for everything that goes bad, for everything that happens, but we don't show up when we're needed for other people. To be a part of community requires commitment. It requires you to be all in. It requires you to be invested in something. That's the idea of devotion. The other half of devotion is with passion. To be devoted to something means your whole heart is in it. If whatever you're devoted to, your affections, your resources, your time, everything is given towards this thing. It's with passion, it's with zeal, it's with excitement. And this idea of them devoting themselves was not just commitment, not just going through the motions, not just showing up and checking it off the list, but showing up with their whole heart. Passionate about what was going on, passionate about the work that was being done there. Their whole hearts were invested into the community. This is what is required for us to be the community God is calling us to be, is this kind of devotion. The next thing that we see here in this passage is they were devoted to a specific set of practices. The first one is this: they devoted themselves to what? The apostles' teaching. They must first be devoted to teaching and learning. A huge key element of the church is learning. Part of our Together 2021 initiative is embarking on something we've called the House of Learning, which is, there's a 5-year pastoral apprenticeship that some people in our church are going through right now to one day become pastors. There's going to be a preaching and teaching course. There's going to be a basics course and more things in the future, so that outside of the Sunday gathering, we are equipping, we are preparing, we are instructing people how to follow Jesus today in our modern world. A key central aspect of the church is always and has always been teaching. Jesus would gather his disciples around and do what? Teach them. One of the most famous moments in Jesus' life was the Sermon on the Mount, where he taught his disciples what it meant to be a part of his kingdom. We need teaching, we need instruction, because we need to relearn the way of the kingdom in contrast to the way that we live today. We are being formed and shaped by our culture, by ourselves, and by other ideologies. And so what we need is to be taught and instructed in the way of Christ. As we talked about that passage last week that Paul says, this is not the way that you have been instructed in the Lord, right? That there's this instruction, there's this teaching that comes by. But it's not just a commitment from the church to teach, but it's the commitment from the church to learn, to receive the teaching, to bury it in their hearts. The next thing we see is that they were, one of the practices was that of communion. It says that they committed themselves to the breaking of bread. It says later on that they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Our conviction at Zion is that communion is primarily is a full meal that is shared together, and at the center of that meal is the bread and the cup. We see that present in the life of Jesus. The Last Supper was the first communion that Jesus had with his disciples. And it was this entire meal. They did not just eat bread and wine. It was this entire meal. It was actually called the Seder meal. And but at the fulcrum point was the bread and the cup, where Jesus instructed them that this was going to be a symbol that he would want them to carry on after his departure. In the early church, this was the same thing. It would be this big meal that they'd come and gather together around the bread and the cup. But what happened in 1 Corinthians is there was people who were getting to that early because they didn't have to work, because they were incredibly wealthy, and they ate all the food and drank all the drinks so that when everybody else showed up who was poor and worked all day, they had nothing. So Paul has to rebuke them and say, this is not the way of Christ, right? But it's this idea of a meal together. And so this is why we don't take corporate communion here, but we believe communion happens best around a table. It is a meal that we share with one another as we fellowship with one another and as we fellowship with Christ. And we get that from here, the breaking of bread and breaking of bread in homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. The next thing they committed themselves was to prayer. And this is something that we've been trying to really grow in as a church. Starting with our pre-gathering prayer, that we commit to showing up here and praying before the service begins. We have a prayer team who all throughout the week is getting prayer requests from all sorts of different people and all sorts of different areas of life, that we commit to praying for the prayer requests that come along. Last year, we did a sermon series on prayer, and it's going to be something that we continue to bring up and up and up again, because we believe is an important practice in the life of a follower of Jesus. The next thing that they were committed to were the gifts of the Spirit. Notice what it says here, that everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. We talked about this at great length in this sermon series when we talked about power, how a key evidence of the kingdom of God coming is, right, wherever the king is, the kingdom follows, and with the kingdom comes signs and wonders. Now, not that we only look for signs and wonders. Jesus had a strong rebuke for the Pharisees for that, but that signs and wonders follow the king. That if we believe that God has given us his Spirit who has raised Jesus from the dead, and if we believe the teachings of the Scriptures, we are to be the hands and feet of Jesus and partake in the works that he had done and will do. Jesus said, you would do greater works than me. And we talked about how that could mean both quantity and quality. The next thing they were committed to was the gathering. It says they were committed to fellowship. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Now, there wasn't a service every day in the temple courts, but that the followers of Jesus just wanted to be around each other so much that every day they just show up to the temple courts to hang out, to talk about Jesus, talk about life, to follow after him. And after that, they'd say, hey, dinner at my house. Everybody come over. We're going to throw down. We're going to eat. They all come, they eat, and they share their lives with one another. They were committed to gathering together outside of the Sunday, right, gathering that they'd have. The next was to worship. They committed themselves to praising God. An important mark of a community is that we come together and we worship. We praise the living God. And the next thing is that they commit to expanding the family. It says they enjoyed the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those being saved. As a community of Jesus, we commit to growing our family. And not for the sake of filling seats or anything arbitrary like that, but because God's heart is for the world. And so our heart is to make this family as big, as crazy, as messy as possible, because this is God's heart, that every tribe, every tongue, every nation would worship him. These are the things we must be committed to as a community. And the last thing I want to talk to us about today is that community is a call to messiness. Community is a call to messiness. Galatians says this, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks that they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions, that they could take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Let's be honest. In a room like this, with all the different people in this room, with all the different backgrounds, it can get real messy. A lot of reasons people really struggle with church is because they've been hurt by the church. And if I could be candid with you, some of the greatest wounds I have come from followers of Jesus. It's messy. It's hard. But anything real is. Don't believe me? Ask somebody who's been in a marriage. Right? The greatest loves you've felt have been from your spouse. The greatest wounds you've felt have been from your spouse. To be known requires risk. And when we are actually being known, it gets messy because we're all broken. We all got jacked up things in our lives. So as we come together and we try to be this community and we bring in our own baggage, guess what happens? I'm going to hurt your feelings at some point. I might be selfish. I might be a little rude. I might be hangry. I might, be short. I might not, be exuberating all this gentleness. I might be insensitive. But being a part of a family means being together through the good, the bad, and the ugly. And vice versa. You're going to bring things forward of your own brokenness, of your own baggage, and it's going to cause wounding. It's going to cause hurt. It's going to cause offenses. But the call of community, this call to family, is a call that love overlooks the offense. Love covers a multitude of sins, is what the scripture says. Right? There's forgiveness. This is what sets the community of Jesus apart from every single other community, is that we forgive one another for the mistakes we make. Now, there's all sorts of nuances we need to add there about like abuse and stuff like that, which I think we all know what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about those extreme circumstances, but the day-to-day stuff, the stuff that people usually get their feelings hurt about, not getting an invite to the party, or someone said that really mean thing, or whatever, someone made a comment about the dress, whatever it was, those things, love covers a multitude of sins, and we learn how to be a family together. The call is clear. That the church is to be together through the highs and the lows. The scriptures are clear. We are to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. This community is here as a hospital for the broken. That people can come in broken, wearied by sin, their lives falling apart. And the one place I want them to feel that they could always come is the church. To not be judged, but to be restored. Paul says clearly, if anyone is trapped in a sin, if anyone's caught, if anyone's bogged down, if anyone is ensnared by the decisions that they made, the call for the church is to tell them that they were wrong and tell them how to fix it. That's what he said, right? No, he says, restore such a person gently, because we walk by the Spirit. To bring that person back to the fullness of life that is found in Christ. The call is also to walk through highs together, to be a community who celebrates well. And that's one thing that bums me out about the church, is we all got so much insecurity and baggage and brokenness that someone brings in a good story and it's, that must be nice to get a promotion. I've been in my job for and it's like, my gosh, dude, we need to be a community who learns how to celebrate. It says to not just weep with those who weep, but rejoice with those who rejoice. Not complain with those who rejoice, not criticize with those who rejoice. Rejoice with them. We should be the people leading the forefront of celebration. Jesus knew how to party, so much so that the people called him a drunkard. They called him a glutton because he was constantly eating and drinking with sinners, celebrating. Jesus' first miracle happened at a party at a wedding in Cana, where he provided more wine for the party. Work that out theologically for yourself, you know? And it wasn't grape juice. That's poor hermeneutics. It was wine, right? The scriptures are clear about how we handle alcohol, but the point is Jesus knew how to celebrate, how to rejoice. And we need to be a community who learns to do the same. That when people have good news, the first place they should run is their community to say, guys, you'll never believe what God did. And we be the first to celebrate with them with sincere joy. The next thing that's clear is that we are to, as a community, confess sin and be a part of the process of restoration. This is where you can come and own your brokenness. Early on in our church planning days, before the church was even materialized, my wife and I and some key leaders who started the church with us were just all in a pretty low place. We'd all come out of a poor environment. We all were carrying a lot of wounds. And I'll never forget, one night my wife and I are sitting there, we're talking, and God had been speaking clearly to us to start a church. And we had a conversation of what kind of church do we want to be? What kind of church do we want to plant? And never forget, one of the first things out of my wife's mouth, and the thing I agree with wholeheartedly, is we want it to be a place where people could come as broken as they are. There's no cleaning up. There's no fixing to make it right. There's just coming in. Tears, boogers, brokenness, and all. And say, my life's a mess. Come in cussing, crying, angry, all of it. And they'd feel welcome in this place. They'd feel loved in this place. They'd feel cared for. We said we never would want to see someone struggle with sin in secret. We would never want to see somebody pretending that everything is good on the outside, but inside, they're dying. But that this would be a place they could come and say, I'm a mess. My life's a mess. And they'd be met with grace and the forgiveness of the Lord and restoration. One of the first things that's here. You know what the call in the scriptures is? James says that we are to confess our sins to one another that we may be healed. There's a healing work that takes place when you own your brokenness. Jesus says to take those deeds that are done in the darkness and bring them to the light. There's freedom that's found there. And so for us as a community, the call for us is to be a part of that work of restoration and healing, and to be a part of the work that guards those aspects of people's lives. The reason people have been so wounded by the church is because they have brought brokenness forward. And you know what? It was slandered about. It was gossiped around. They were judged for those things. And if that even creeps its way into this community even slightly, the community is falling apart. And so the decision is upon every single individual in this room to guard the culture, to protect those things, to protect your brother and sister from the harm of gossip and slander and judgment. The call to community is a tough one. It's not easy. You're going to see and experience this. A key part for us as a church is we've decided to do community groups. We've decided to relaunch those things. Our community groups is what held our church together during the pandemic. And so looking in our leaders' eyes as the year ended, some of them told us, we need a break. You know, we held it together. We held the fort down when everything was falling apart and all this emotional baggage and racial riots and all this kind of stuff. So it was like a little timeout for us. So some other people have stepped forward to offer their homes and to be hosts, to be community group leaders. So if that's you, if you feel God speaking to you about being a host, I want you to sign up. and see what God can do through you in community groups. But we've committed to being a church that doesn't just commit to this, the teaching aspect of things, but to really life around a table where we can share these things. We can share these burdens. We can operate in the gifts, et cetera, et cetera. So the goal is to mid to end February to have these launched. I'll have more details for us next week as we kind of finalize things with our hosts. We're going to do a quick training with our hosts and our leaders to get them all kind of on the same page as to what the meetings are supposed to, the community groups are to run like, and then we're going to relaunch those. And I want to encourage you as your pastor to buy into that. This is good, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're doing this. But this isn't the fullness of the church. The fullness of the church is experienced when you do life with other people. So it's going to require commitment. I'm not going to lie to you. When Monday night rolls around, when Wednesday night rolls around, and you're tired, and you had a long day at work, and you just want to stay home, binge watch some Netflix, eat some ice cream, and go to bed, you're not going to want to go to community group, but that's when you need it the most. To go and to share, guys, this week's stunk. Everything went wrong. My life has fallen apart. Is that pasta, right? That is what the community groups are for. And so I'm going to plead with you, please be a part of those. And if you don't believe me, ask the people who were a part of them last round and how life-giving they were. Hard, tiring, you didn't want to go, but man, when you went, you experienced love and grace and compassion like never before. I'm going to ask John to come up as we close. And I just want to speak to you from the heart. My desire, our elders' desire, our leadership's desire here at Zion is for this to be a family. A family-like community is one of our values that we have here. But the only way we get there is together. I can't lead us to become a family. Jake can't lead us to become a family. We become a family when you, as an individual, decide this is your family. And you commit to it. Good, bad, ugly, and everything in between. We all have needs that need to be met. Hurts that we need to share, tears we need to cry, prayers we need prayed over us, celebrations that need to happen for us. We all have those needs. And we all want those needs to be met by the church. But many of us don't have the buy-in to meet those needs for somebody else. And so this is my urge, this is my call to you, call to this church. For us to become the kind of church God wants us to be, it's going to take your buy-in. It's going to take your commitment. It's going to take your love for the people seated next to you. To say, I love you enough to show up. I love you enough to give. I love you enough to care. I love you enough to provide, right? I love you enough to ask you how you are doing. The only way we get there is together. And not if 3 people do it, not if 4 people do it. We have a culture here when everybody commits to that. And so that's my ask of you today. Would you be a part of something bigger than yourself? Would you engage in the story that God is writing for our city through our church today? And I promise you that if you commit yourself, if you go all in, if you give of yourself, it's going to cost you something. But what you will gain can never be compared to what you gave up. And you're going to see God move in power if you be a part. Church, the ball's in your court. The ball's in our court. What kind of church will we become? Jesus, thank you for this time. Thank you for your word. I pray, Lord, that we would be...
Thank you so much for checking out this week's sermon. If you would like, drop us a like, give us a follow, and share these videos with your friends and loved ones. You can find us at ZionCityChurch.net, and we're also on Facebook and Instagram. If you would also like to meet with us in person, we are here in Los Lunas, just off of Highway 47, right across from the 35. Don't miss next week's sermon. We're still in the Pillar series. Invite a friend. We'll see you guys next week.